So now let's add an object, maybe a cube, and I'm going to add another cube, and then I move it to somewhere here. And you can see that each object, when I click it, has actually a filled small circle at the center. And that is the 3D object center or pivot point, like the pivot point inside Alias. And when, for example, I move my object by clicking on the arrows, I don't necessarily move all the geometry points. I actually move the pivot point and through that move the complete object. And if maybe I press N or click on the small plus icon here, I open the transformation panel. And inside the transformation panel, we have multiple pieces of information, for example, transform. And here, for example, I can see that this cube, for example, is positioned along the x-axis at 3.75, not along the y-axis, and along the z-axis it's positioned at 1.6. For example, here I could click in and then actually overwrite that information. I could also say rotate this one. So you see, this actually is exactly the same way how Alias works with the pivot point and the information window, so that when you change something inside the information window, you change the object container. That's the way maybe how I would describe it, and not necessarily go into the edit mode and push and pull the vertices or geometry elements of an object. And you see every time when I move this, it's being updated. And then all the time you could go back, for example, to reset this one. Because I'm not really working with the geometry. I'm simply just working with the object. I can always this way quickly specify where this pivot point should be, how it should be rotated or scaled. For example, if I type in 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5, now I have that object scaled by a half along the x, y, and z axis. And that's interactive because all the time I could go back and, for example, change it. So that's, for example, what you could use the transform palette for, which is exactly the same how the information window in Alias works. And inside the property panel, if I expand the 3D cursor panel here, you can also see information about the X, Y, and Z location of the 3D cursor. So for example, I could click and then you see where the X, Y, and Z information is being updated. But I could also, for example, say, well, this cursor, I would like to be at X, Y, and Z being 0. Or for example, X 4, Y 0, and 2, 1. And then I could, for example, add an object exactly at that position.